I suppose it's Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. He profiles similarly to Davante Adams. What if this guy goes out and puts up like a top 3 season? And there was no way our cats could get up on that armoire. And we knew that. We walk home from a bar down the street, TV's on. TV started turning itself on at night while we were sleeping to just like fuzz, like straight out of the movies.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode here of Playernormal Activity. I am your host, Craig Reith, and I want to thank you all for joining me. In this series, I'm going to be exploring not only the fantasy football world, but the world around us. We don't always see the world of the paranormal. And I want to thank my first guest here. He's been a great sounding board and a great friend going over this idea and concept with me. His name is Nate Polvote. I'm sure you've seen him all over the place. He is a senior digital media editor and a columnist and a podcaster for In Between Media. He does pretty much everything over there with that great crew. Along with his wife, Jen, he is a founder of the 32 and 32 Fantasy Football Show. He's a featured writer over at Fantasy Pros, a writer for Trophy Smack, and you can find him on Twitter at Nate Polvote. Nate, again, I want to thank you so much for coming on and being my first guest. And how are you doing?
Thank you for having me, Craig. I am very excited. I'm doing great, man. It's actually warm in Denver for the first time in a while. Like, it's going to be consistently warm, so I don't have to wear this crap anymore, hopefully. But yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Well, that's great. And again, we're going to be talking about 2 different segments here on this show and every episode. The first one, we're going to be going over a fantasy player of choosing. So Nate's let me know who he wants to talk about ahead of time. And we're going to be getting into the paranormal after that. So our first player that we're going to be going into is Allen Lazard, the Green Bay Packers. So Nate, why don't you tell me what interests you about him in this, time frame leading up to the draft in this next 2022 season?
So obviously with Green Bay, we've got Rodgers back on a massive contract. He didn't get traded. But they did trade Davante Adams, which is interesting. I think we all assumed that when Rodgers re-signed that Davante Adams was going to stick around. They franchise tagged him, made it seem even more like he was going to stick around. Then obviously we know what happened. So now we've got Allen Lazard and Amari are really the 2 receivers there. You could say Randall Cobb. He doesn't count. I mean, he does, but he only counts in week 1. So we've seen Lazard play. We know that Aaron Rodgers has a track record of liking guys that he's familiar with. They can go out and get somebody in the draft. They can sign a free agent. I just feel like Lazard's going to be the guy that Rodgers is going to target in that offense.
Yeah, so he being Rodgers, doesn't have a whole lot of history of doing much with rookie receivers. So we saw it last year, and they had a bit more around him, but with Amari Rodgers, didn't use him. I did find it interesting, too, looking back through the history. So they don't have a whole lot to begin with, but then you look at, okay, maybe they will go out and use one of these first 2 first-round picks or second-round picks on a receiver. The team doesn't have a long history of doing that either. Gone through and looked at the wide receivers they've taken in the draft since Rodgers became a starter in 2008. The big names really are, you had Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb early on in 2008, 2011. Then Adams in 2014. And you had a couple third-round picks, Amari Rodgers being one, and that's it. So it makes me wonder if that front office really has an aversion to it. And I have to believe that they've talked to Rodgers about what their plan is here. He said he was aware of them trading Adams. It seemed like he had some good things to say about Sammy Watkins, whether or not he remains on the team or not. Have you seen a whole lot of Rodgers talking about Lazard with being the senior wide receiver there on the team right now?
I haven't seen it. I suppose for me, it's a history thing. We're looking at how he's used his receivers in the past. Davante Adams was terrible his first 2 seasons statistically. They just didn't use him. I think his highest finish was wide receiver like 30 something. I'd have to go back and look. They just didn't use him. We probably would have seen break out a little bit sooner if he wasn't sitting behind a future Hall of Fame wide receiver in Davante Adams. But Lazard was the clear number 2, and he had a big week when Davante Adams was out this past season. It just all lines up to me. Aaron Rodgers likes familiarity. He likes someone he knows. He likes someone he knows he can count on. You're not going to find that in a rookie receiver. You thought he'd find it with Randall Cobb, but Cobb's just getting so up there in age for a wide receiver. I say as he's 9 years younger than me. There's nothing that's been said necessarily in the media or by Rodgers or anywhere. It's just a gut feeling and just knowing Rodgers.
So is there anyone else currently that they have rostered that you really see as a starter for them? Do you think it would be him and Randall Cobb at this point with what they have, or do you think it would end up turning to someone like, again, Sammy Watkins' deal doesn't necessarily scream starter or that he's even going to be around through the offseason, but anyone else that you see of interest besides Lazard as a starter for that team right now?
Not really. I don't see that Randall Cobb will be a part. He'll be a piece, but he's not a starter at this point in his career. He hasn't been for a while. Amari Rogers, I don't think plays into much. It's probably going to be Watkins to start the season, though I still think there's a chance they maybe go after Jarvis Landry. Maybe, but who knows?
Yeah, they don't have a really long history of signing wide receivers in free agency either.
Right.
To your point, that goes to that familiarity thing where Rodgers likes what he knows. So it almost feels like maybe they use more of the running backs in that receiving role too, along with a guy like Lazard, because Lazard's really the only big receiver that they have, like you said, name wise, and then also physically. I mean, he's 6'5", 225 or so, got that familiarity. Where do you see Lazard if he, let's say the rest of this offseason and the draft time go as we foresee from what you've said? Are you thinking a wide receiver 2 upside? Do you think he's going to settle in still as a wide receiver 3 if best case scenario?
Best case scenario, I could see him as a wide receiver 1, like overall wide receiver 5, 6, 7, somewhere in that category. I suppose it's Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. He profiles similarly to Davante Adams. What if this guy goes out and puts up like a top 3 season? I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility, given he's got a Hall of Fame quarterback that somehow is in his prime at 39.
Yeah. And they are going to be competing for that division with a Minnesota team that seemingly is just going forward with this sort of issues that they're seeing. But beyond that, Detroit, they might be frisky again, but they still aren't a team that's ready to compete for the division. Chicago is a complete mess. And the rest of the NFC, you have Tampa Bay, you have that mess out in the NFC West with the Rams. Arizona seems no one knows what they're doing with Kyler Murray. Seattle's given up. It does seem to still be wide open for the Packers to get a top 3 seed or maybe even the 1 seed again if they can find that receiving weapon. And Lazard, to your point, he's shown a bit, especially this past season in games when Davante Adams has been out. There's that familiarity. I do like him. Where are you comfortable taking him in a draft? If you're doing, let's say, redraft, because more of those are starting up now.
So in redraft, I feel like he's going to land somewhere in that like 5th to 6th round, and I'm okay with that. I'd probably take him as high as 4th round, honestly, somewhere around in there. But I've seen him go in some of the best ball on underdog, like 5th, 6th round, right around in there. And I think right now, that's a good place to get him.
Yeah, if he ends up being, wide receiver 2 or better on the season, that could definitely still end up looking like a great value for you. Are you looking to target him in dynasty leagues too? We have a couple, 2 or 3 years, we believe, of Rodgers left. Do you feel comfortable taking Lazard in that same sort of window, believing in him for the next couple of years?
I do. And given his kind of current value in Dynasty, you're getting him for pretty cheap. I'm a guy who's going to kick the tires on him in every league. I'm reaching out to every owner, and I want to know what their price is for him. You can do all the trade calculators in the world, but it comes down to what the person in your league values him. But it's not going to be a ton. Unless there's somebody like me who's like, this guy has wide receiver 1 upside. I want wide receiver 1 upside return. You're not going to find many people like that out there right now. Yeah. And I think 2-3 seasons, I think Lazard could be huge.
So he's on a 1-year deal for about $4 million with the Packers right now. Given the current uncertainty of that whole wide receiver core, do you think he's a guy that if he does show up here and has a nice season, that Rodgers is going to go to bat for to re-sign, like he started with bringing Cobb back via trade? That way he just has a guy that he knows?
Oh, I think definitely. I think if they get that connection and they have that rapport that we think they're going to have, there's no way Green Bay can let him go if Rodgers is sticking around. There's just no way. What are you going to do?
Yeah. Who else does he have? He has Cobb that he knows. Tunyon's been there for a little bit, but he's a tight end, and Rodgers just hasn't utilized tight ends very much over the past years, really since what feels like Jermichael Finley had a big season. But Lazard hasn't done a whole lot throughout his career in terms of fantasy finishes because it's been Davante Adams, and Lazard's only in his 5th season here, I think. He didn't play much that first year at all. I think he appeared in 1 game and had 1 catch or something like that. And then he worked his way up, but he's never had a finish above wide receiver 55, 56. When people are looking for a name, I really don't think that they are looking to him just because there's so many other big names out there that have proven it. So value-wise, I agree. He feels like a great value at this point for what should be, at the very bottom, the 2nd wide receiver on the team for the Packers this year.
If they go out and get someone like Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave in the draft, I still think at least for redraft purposes, you're going to want Allen Lazard.
Yeah, to your point about familiarity with Rodgers, we've seen him big games, close games. He was just always throwing it. He was laser focused on Davante Adams, throwing double, triple coverage sometimes. Is he going to trust a rookie like that? History says no. And on the same point, the Packers have hit with early receivers, but I have a hard time seeing them using both picks or even 2 of their top 4 picks in that 1st and 2nd round on the receiver because the team just doesn't do that. And with the purge they've had of contracts, they have other spots that they do need help.
Yeah. And that's where they're going to focus on the draft. You have to assume that they're probably feeling pretty good about where they're at wide receiver. They've got 4 viable guys right now. They probably bring in, maybe they get a guy in the 6th or 7th round just to fill in, someone to have on the roster, a warm body, an Olamide Zacchaeus type receiver, something like that. Guys who's going to get maybe 5 targets all season. We'll see. But I really do think that Lazard's probably the wide receiver one in this offense, and that's not going to change between now and September.
Yeah, and if you get him, like you said, at that 5th, 6th round value at this point in the year, it's only going to go up immediately after the draft. If they don't take someone high, you can probably keep that sort of value through most of the offseason. But if that buzz starts up again, once you start getting close to actual preseason games, his value is going to be going up at redraft at this point. So Dynasty Leagues, I agree, this is a great point to go jump on him now to see what you can get for him. Have you had any bites, any successful trades on getting Lazard so far?
I have not so far. But to be fair, I'm in the leagues, mostly analysts who are feeling the same way about him, and I'm not willing to pay what they want for him at this point.
All right. Anything else left in regards to Allen Lazard and his future with the Green Bay Packers here you want to talk about for the 2022 season?
I'm just excited for the Lazard King to go off, baby.
We'll be here for it, and guys, you all heard it here first if it does happen. And it's at this point that we're going to switch it up. We're going to move from the football field into the 40. And you have a story for us in regards to a haunting that happened that you experienced yourself, correct?
Correct.
To kind of set the setting, approximate time frame. You don't have to say where it happened or anything like that if you don't want to, but give us a little background and then tell us what happened to you and anyone else that you experienced it with that you know about.
So it was 2007. Jen and I had been together for about a year. We'd been living in an apartment north of Denver. We were in our early 20s. I think we were 25 at the time. And we had this itch. We really wanted to live in downtown Denver, which is something we felt like we needed to do to experience in our life. So we did some searching around, and we ended up finding this duplex in this neighborhood in Denver called Congress Park. It's right in the heart of the city. It's just off of the iconic road Colfax, which is actually the longest east-west running road in the United States, from the mountains all the way through Denver out to the plains. It's the main vein through the city, if you will. So found this cool house. We're both real big into history, and this is one of the older neighborhoods in Denver. They started building houses in the late 1800s, early 1900s. We'll just leave it at that. We moved in November, and a couple weeks after we moved in, my wife's brother's girlfriend had a birthday. So we went downtown for her birthday, had a blast, took a cab home. We get home, and at the time, we were smokers. We decided we were going to sit on our little front porch and have a cigarette before we went to bed. Sat down, full ashtray, open a pack up, and then we decide, no, you know what? We're not going to. Set the pack and the lighter down. We go inside. We go to bed. We wake up the next morning, Sunday morning. We go outside to sit down and have a cigarette. This is going to sound awful, but we loved watching people do the walk of shame home from the bars on Colfax. It was the bar area, and it was great entertainment for a couple of 25-year-olds. We go out there. The ashtray's gone. Now, mind you, it was full of cigarette butts, like overloaded. Like one of those ones where you look at it and you're like, man, that person is lazy. Just empty the thing. But there were no cigarette butts anywhere. And there was one cigarette missing from the pack. This is weird. Like, obviously, some homeless dude didn't walk up onto our patio and steal an ashtray full of cigarettes. How weird would that be?
Yeah.
Never found the ashtray. It was unexplained. We let it go. Didn't really think too much of it. Like, that was weird. Okay. Being history nerds, a couple weeks later, we went down to the Denver Public Library. They have a whole this massive genealogy section. It's an entire floor of the building. Just doing research on the neighborhoods, like seeing how old our house was. Turns out it was built in 1911. Wasn't even originally a duplex. Found all this really cool information. Here's the thing that we found that was disturbing, to say the least. So Congress Park, the neighborhood that we live in, was established in the late 1800s, early 1900s. In order to establish that neighborhood, that land was actually a city cemetery up until I think it was 1880. They decided that the land had been basically allotted for a congressional park and homes. So they took all of these bodies, they exhumed thousands of bodies and moved them to another cemetery. Problem was, one of the guys that they had contracted to do it, what he was doing, because they got paid by the casket as they exhumed bodies. So what he was loading up on children's caskets, and he was cutting bodies in half and in thirds and getting paid 2 to 3 times per body he moved. The city said, forget it. They stopped exhuming bodies and they just started building.
Wow.
So this whole probably 3 square mile area, the Denver Botanic Gardens sit on this land. Cheeseman Park, Congress Park, and I think 1,000 homes are on this land. So, including our house.
Of course.
It's on this land. Of course. Okay, this is strange. Like, they exhume Cheeseman Park is one of the parks that's on this land. Every once in a while, human bones will turn up. Like a dog will find a human bone or something. They were doing a new parking garage, the Botanical Gardens, a few years ago. They had to stop construction because they found like 15 bodies, like graves. So they had to exhume all of them properly and relocate them first. Nobody knows who these people are at this point, but it's insane. There's bodies everywhere underneath these homes and the Botanical Gardens and businesses and the streets. So we read that and we're like, okay, so that whole thing with the ashtray disappearing from our front porch, that's starting to seem a little weirder now. So a couple weeks go by, we're kind of on edge. Not on edge, we're just like, weird. Some of these creeks don't feel so innocent anymore. I don't know. It's probably nothing. We wake up one morning and we're very particular about like blankets and stuff. You fold them and you put them on the same place on the couch when you're done with them. We find one of our blankets in the morning perfectly folded in the middle of our dining room floor.
Wow.
That stuff started to happen fairly frequently. Like, it wasn't really an odd occurrence to have this stuff happen. In our bedroom, for example, we had this TV that we got from some friends of my wife's parents, Jen's parents. It was from Canada. So it had the weird Canadian, like, French plug on it. You could only turn it on from the top and the remote didn't work. And it was up on an armoire. And there was no way our cats could get up on that armoire. And we knew that. We walk home from a bar down the street, TV's on. TV started turning itself on at night while we were sleeping to just like fuzz, like straight out of the movies. We attributed it to maybe like, it's a TV, it's a foreign TV. Maybe it's not liking the power. Like, we had the adapter for it and everything, but maybe it's just not liking it. I don't know. Didn't know really how to play it off. So stuff just kept happening. And then obviously you're living on top of a bunch of dead bodies, which is just the strangest thing. And it didn't really faze us so much. End of our lease, we go to move out. And now, have you ever heard of the theory about photographs when you see the little light bubbles? Yeah. So we took pictures upon move out. Just everything's in good condition. These are our pictures. Yay, our landlord lived in New York City, so we wanted to send them to her. I have never seen so many light orbs in photographs in my life. And it was more in the basement of the house, which was the weirdest part. They were everywhere. Everywhere. The only time I've ever really consistently sleepwalked was when we lived in that house. It's never been a thing for me. The only other time it's happened to me was in this house, and we had some really weird stuff going on, like stuff falling off the walls, doors opening and closing. We saged the house. It never happened to me again. I mean, that house was probably my favorite place we've ever lived, in spite of the weird haunting stuff. But there's nothing quite like waking up to a TV turning on out of nowhere that doesn't have a remote that works to turn it on, and knowing. And it's funny, when we moved out of that house, we actually moved into another house in that neighborhood 3 blocks away. It was a standalone house, not a duplex. It was actually even older. Still had the old coal pitch in the basement from the coal boiler from when the house was built. Funny story. One of our cats got into the old coal pitch, and he's like a tan cat, except for the next 2 weeks after that, he wasn't.
I can imagine.
It was, we had similar stuff at that house too. Like I said, same neighborhood, just a couple blocks away. We had instances where our front door would be unlocked, and I know I locked it. Like, I remembered locking it 5 minutes ago. Why is that door unlocked? We only ended up living there for a month, not because of anything paranormal, but the same thing when we moved out of that house. Our photos, move out photos, orbs absolutely everywhere. A lot of the stuff along Colfax is rumored to be haunted. There's a lot of music venues, old bars, old buildings. There are stories of things like lights falling off onto a stage, or people actually seeing a silhouette. There was a point I thought I saw a silhouette at our duplex. I don't know if I was just extremely tired or if I was just being ultra paranoid. I'll never probably know. I would have loved to have had an opportunity to have a ghost hunter come into that house and just spend a night in there and see what they could find. It was never anything, we never felt scared. There was never anything aggressive necessarily in nature about it. Like, it's just one of those things where, oh man, you think, weird stuff happens, then you find out you're living on top of a cemetery.
So how long were you in that neighborhood in Hull? like in that general area, living there?
13 months.
Did you talk to anyone else like that lived, like neighbors or anything? You ever hear stories from anyone else while you were there or after the fact?
When we moved in 2007, we moved in when the Rockies and the Red Sox were getting ready to were facing off in the World Series. And that was during Halloween, and I'm a diehard Red Sox fan, and I had all my Sox stuff on Halloween. So nobody in the neighborhood, literally, nobody really talked to us because they saw my Red Sox stuff when we were playing the Rockies in the series. How petty people can be. I have known other people who have lived down there who have talked about like lights turning on and off, weird stuff being moved. One of the parks, I don't know if it's I think it is Cheeseman. People swear that if you go there at night, like you'll see like figures in the bushes. If you catch it on the right night, there are like silhouettes and stuff walking the park. Nobody's ever obviously caught anything, but it's...
Well, even just what that can do to your psyche, I imagine, just knowing. And I wonder how many people know of the history of it, because it doesn't sound like that's really a publicized thing, although I guess the stories about finding bones and that stuff, that's in the news, I would assume, and people hear about that. But the whole exhuming the bodies and partially moving it sounds like you had to go digging to find that information. I'm guessing the city isn't too proud of that, but
it's become more public knowledge now. Some of the news channels have done stories on it. And the thing is, though, is that Colorado is full of transplants. So there are a lot of people who have only been here for 2, 3, 4 years that probably live in that neighborhood that have no idea. Because like it's been on the news, but it's not like, here's a pamphlet. You moved into the neighborhood. This is what you need to know. Because we had a conversation about like, was somebody murdered in our duplex? Is that why weird stuff is happening? What's going on? And then, no, somebody might have been murdered in there. Not that we can find, but it still blows my mind that they did that. And that there was never any project to go back in and try and figure out where some of these bodies are, like in the parks and like those places. Like you'd think they'd want to find that.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about with that is presumably this guy, when he started, although with what he did, maybe not, had some sort of a map or pattern as far as where they were starting, to take bodies from and move them out. You would think you'd be able to go back and find out, okay, here's sort of like, a ley line area where they stopped. There's probably stuff past here, but they didn't do any of that from what you're saying. The fact that they just proceeded to, cut everything off once he didn't uphold the end of his bargain ethically, and then they just, all right, we're going to do the same sort of, it's like, all right, you messed up in terms of taking care of this, we're just not going to do it at all. That's just crazy. But a lot of this stuff happened back in the day.
Well, yeah, I mean, like late 1800s, early 1900s, and I think, and I've seen this, I don't know if it's true, but I've seen a couple pieces about it where they say that the big reason that they were just like, let's stop, was because they'd gotten to the mainly like Asian immigrant section and like back then it was like, yeah, no, forget it. They can just stay. It doesn't matter. Which, again, that's a sad statement about the city of Denver at the turn of the century. And that could be why they did it. That could just be old folklore.
That certainly is something. And to your point, those little odd occurrences start to add up a little bit more each time, one, they happen, and then two, finding out what you're living over potentially and like living on top of. Whether or not other people believe in ghosts or haunting, we're not here to litigate that. But the idea of energy and good energy, bad energy, karma, stuff like that, I do believe that there is something like that out there in the world where, the more good you do, generally speaking, more good's going to come to you. The more bad you put out there, the more bad comes on to you. And for a city, maybe there aren't, those things happening to individuals, but bad land, I certainly believe that there's something to that. And it sounds like that may be what you ran into.
Yeah. So I had a physics teacher in high school. He was my favorite teacher. He was the best. Just couldn't have loved him more. Did so many like crazy experiments. He did one, laid on the bed of nails, and then had someone break a brick on his chest with a board just to show the dispersion. But he was we got into a conversation in class one day about this, specifically about ghosts, because one of the students was like, you can't possibly believe in ghosts, Mr. Miller. You're a scientist. You're a physicist. He's like, no, I do. And let me explain why. It's very simple. The amount of energy that the human body creates from a physics standpoint, when you die, it doesn't just stop. Energy dispersal has been proven in physics. It's an absolute in physics. And by that, when the heart stops, the human body should explode because that energy has to go somewhere. So where does it go?
It goes out somewhere.
It goes out somewhere. It has to go out somewhere because we don't blow up as far as I know.
No, not usually, unless something else crazy is happening. You just die in your sleep. You don't hear stories about people like that. You'd have a very different average human lifestyle if you died in your sleep, your body exploded.
The very first one, when all their heads are exploding everywhere. That was just how people died, man. Oh, that's my story, man.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And it's creepy to happen to you. Little background, I haven't had anything that I feel that I can definitively say it was paranormal happened to me, but I'm certainly open to it. I love talking about it. Clearly, it's a big part of the show here. And I want to thank you for coming on and sharing it, because I think that really fits perfectly the kind of stuff that I'm interested in. And I know a lot of other people out there are interested in. I want to have this fantasy football that I love, but this other just weird, unexplained, paranormal, anything I'm interested in. So thank you, and I appreciate it. And I know you said you have other potential stories, and we'd certainly love to have you back sometime in the future to go over that too.
I'd love to come back. I got more where that came from.
Awesome. Why don't you let everyone know again where they can find you and all of your content?
You can find me on Twitter at Nate Paulvote. You can find my content at In Between Media at IBT_media on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. You can find my work at Fantasy Pros as a feature writer for the NFL. 32 and 32 Fantasy Football podcast with Jen will be coming back soon. And I am now a content creator at Trophy Smack.
That's a lot of different places you can find him, and a lot of great content he's putting out there. So thank you again for being on here with me, Nate. I really do appreciate it. And remember, everyone, thank you for joining us for this first episode. They'll be dropping every Friday at noon Eastern, going forward with a new guest and a new player. And whether you're interested in the Amityville Horror or Aaron Rodgers, we're going to have you covered here at Playernormal Activity. Hey, thanks for watching. If you'd like more great fantasy football content like this, please click the link down below here.